Excellent. So I'm just going to just wait another minute, just in case anyone else wants to join us. Today, of course, is all about study number two of the Texas All-State Studies. These are hard studies. Wow, these are really difficult. I would love to know who chooses these studies. I mean, they're very, very difficult, but I guess that's testament to how well you guys all play. I was just doing a couple of concerts in Texas maybe 3 weeks ago, and I gave a master class that was really high standard. I think you guys in Texas have a really high standard, which is fantastic. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen. I'm the professor of flute at Northwestern State University. I'm actually in my office because when I go home and practice and teach, my neighbors do get annoyed. So I tend to come into the office. MSU is right on the border of Texas and Louisiana. We're just on the Louisiana side, but almost all my students here in the flute studio are from Texas. Partly because they don't have to pay anything to come here, which is why they all come here. But we really love being close to Texas because it means when the applications come in, I get a great pool of high standard flute players to choose from. So I'm also British, as you can probably tell by my accent. I'm from Scotland. So the whole Texas all-state thing was new to me until a couple of years ago when I moved to the US. And in fact, it was Flute World and I discussed last year about recording the Texas all-state studies to make some demo versions for you guys. And last year I did that and I was like, wow, these are so much harder than I thought. And then I did it again this year and I was like, wow, these are still much harder than I remember. They're very, very difficult studies. So next month, of course, we'll look at number 3. And today we're going to have a look at number 2. So if any of you guys want to put your cameras on, apart from Rebecca, I really appreciate it. I love to see you guys. And we'll talk through the study. We'll demonstrate a few corners. You can ask your questions. You can speak them out loud or you can pop them in the chat. If you want to just ask some questions as you're going, just do that. Just stick them in the chat. Oh, there's people in the waiting room and I completely forgot to look at the waiting room as I'm talking away to you guys. Let me let them in. Excellent. Here they come. On my MacBook, it pings when someone tries to get in, but on my work computer, it doesn't ping. So the amount of times I'm in Zoom meetings and just leave people in the waiting room because I completely forgot that they're there. Great. Okay, so for those of you who's just joined, I was just saying who I am. I'm Stephen. Nice to meet you guys. I'm the flute professor at Northwestern State. And today we're going to be having a look at study number 2, which is the E-flat major study by Furstenau. Does anyone know anything about Furstenau? He's an interesting guy. I like to read quite a lot about all these old flute players, partly because all of my teachers, when I was a student and from before college, went to Paris. They all studied at the Paris Conservatoire. And that's really just a location thing because of where I'm from. You know, we're so close to Paris. It's only like 2 hours on the train or 35 minutes on the flight away. So I was very much brought up in the French school of flute playing. And at the time when I was a teenager and then through my undergraduate degree, I had no idea that that was unusual. You know, or special, should I say. I just learned the flute. But only now, having, you know, being older and having played full time for so many years and now going into academia and teaching full time, this is my first year as a full-time college professor, having played full time for 15 or 16 years, I realized actually studying in the French school is quite special. And I know lots of us, especially in the US, have bits of the French school in our playing, but to be kind of immersed in it as a teenager was really special. And all these people like Furstenau and all these names came up all the time to me. And so we just knew about them. Furstenau wasn't actually from Paris, but he played on the flute prior to the design of Boehm. And this is where it's important because in Paris before Boehm, there was lots and lots of people playing lots and lots of different system flutes. And then when Boehm came along and he designed his instrument, he couldn't find anyone to play it. Nobody wanted to play it because the flute at the time was treated as a little different to how we think of it now. We think of this as a really fantastic, serious concert instrument. But prior to the kind of mid to late 1800s, nobody really was playing flute concerts very often. They sometimes played in the orchestra, but even through that romantic period of music, composers didn't really love the flute. And that was because of how it played. It had none of these keys, of course, certainly not as many. It was out of tune. It was made of wood. The blowhole was much smaller. It had a small sound. The intonation was poor. It was kind of thin. It was very difficult to play, but it was just a different kind of instrument. It was a different character. And Furstenau was very against the Boehm system flute. He didn't like it at all. Interestingly, he sent his son to study with Boehm as a flute player, but he didn't want to play this system. And then Boehm sold his flute design to the Louis Locke Company, well, what is now the Louis Locke Company in Paris, and then the flute professor at the Conservatoire in Paris loved this and was friends with Louis Lot's godfather, who was also a flute maker, and all this stuff started, which launched the Boehm system flute being really popular, and also the French school of flute playing that we know. But Furstenau was not part of that, and that's why I tell you this story. He wrote tons and tons of pieces. He was a bit naughty because sometimes he copied other composers. There's a couple of concertos for flute, for example, which you probably have never heard of. I've never played them in real life. I just know of them, and they're almost identical to a couple of violin concertos written by other composers 10 years earlier. So he was a little bit naughty. But he wrote tons and tons of books that weren't etudes, but actually books about music. And most of them were focusing on style and interpretation rather than on the technique of playing the flute. And that's kind of interesting because that applies directly into this study. We know from Furstenau's writing that he was really obsessive about interpretation and style and approach rather than the technicalities of playing the instrument. So when we approach this study, that's something we absolutely have to keep in the forefront of what we are doing, not to let the technical demands of the instrument get in the way of the musical and stylistic purpose to the study, if that makes any sense. And that brings us to quite a few challenges in this study. I can only imagine that when the committee choose the Texas All-State Studies, they're choosing these 3 studies for particular reasons and for very different reasons. So what do we think the E-flat major Furstenau study is for? Oh, let me let someone in. Daisy, here she comes. I'm also going to share this on the screen if I can remember how to do this. Hi, Tulip, how are you? We have a Tulip and we have a Daisy. We just need a Rose now. We've got the full set. Nice to see you guys here. I'm just going to find this to share screen. Bear with me 1 second. My work computer is so annoying compared to my personal computer, but it's got a better camera. Okay. Ooh, that's not the button I want. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay, so share screen. Screen 1, share. Oh, why is it sharing that screen? Can you see the music or can you see Flute World? You can see Flute World, right? No, that's not what I want. Hang on. If I move that, we'll get this. I have like all these different screens on my computer in my office. Here we go. Right, let me move that to there. Okay, this is gonna work. Yes. Share screen. There we go. Okay. Can you guys see the music? Give me a little nod. Yes, you can. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so just unmute yourself. You don't have to do your hands up or anything like that. My students here at NSU get nervous because I don't even do hands up. I just ask people. So what do you think this one is all about? Now, there is no right or wrong answer to this because what one person finds difficult, another finds easy, and so on. So what do you think the challenges for this study are? Who's going first? Daisy, I'm going to pick on you just because you're beside me in the screen.
Control throughout the etude, like with the releases and everything, and then the flexibility in the octave range.
100%, 100%. Control and flexibility, without doubt, are the hardest things about playing our instrument. There is no denying that. A lot of people who don't play the flute would say fingers or something like that. Sure, that can be difficult, but we know that flexibility is really the key. And certainly as a professional player and teacher, it's what I'm listening for when I'm auditioning people to come into my program. I'm like, are they flexible? And I don't mean flexible in terms of musicianship, although that's important, but I mean in terms of their embouchure control. Are they flexible? And all these mostly guys that wrote these studies, I'm sure there was plenty of fantastic not guys playing flute, but unfortunately, because of the times, we don't often hear about them. But so these guys that we are familiar with, they all knew that that was one of the challenges, so they incorporated that into their studies. Same in the cargo layer. The flexibility is a real issue. Anthony's popped up in the chat and he says tempo is an issue. I don't know if Anthony's able to talk, but what do you mean by tempo? Can you be more specific? Just want to stop the share very. Just checking there's no one in the waiting room. Great. Anyone have any ideas what he means by tempo? What do you think? Yeah, Rebecca.
I think when he's saying tempo, he might mean that because it's slow and with unusual rhythms, that maintaining an even tempo throughout the entire piece will be challenging.
Yes. Slower things are in many ways much harder than fast things, and it brings with them an enormous amount of challenges. For example, sustaining a good focused quality of sound is going to be more challenging at a slow tempo than a fast tempo. So that's absolutely going to be highlighted in this piece. Vibrato, that's something I really want to talk about today. I did record this study. You can listen to it on the Flute World website and on their YouTube channel. I did not read the Texas all-state requirements before I recorded it, so my tempo is slower than what they're wanting you to play it at. If I was to perform this on stage, I would argue that my tempo is a more sensible tempo to make music with. But for the purpose of the audition, you have to go with what they're saying. Because if they hear this 500 times, they'll get annoyed. So certainly I would if I had stipulated a tempo and people are ignoring it. So please, please, please read what's on the Texas All-State website. Read the errata in the book. For this study, there's not so many errors that you have to change. In fact, there's none. The two that they mention are kind of they don't need to mention, but they are specific about the tempo. So go read it because it's not as slow as you might think, which in some ways makes it easier, but in some ways makes it harder. So let's just, while we're on the subject, talk about vibrato. What is, and again, this is very subjective to the individual, but what makes a good vibrato? Who can answer that? Tulip, can you answer that for us? Oh, Tulip's not our camera. Oh, yes, she is. Tulip, what makes a good vibrato? Can you give us some ideas?
What makes a good vibrato? I think
I love that in America you say
consistency.
vibrato. I forget that. A good vibrato. I say vibrato. I have to be more American.
Vibrato.
Vibrato. What makes a
Oh.
good vibrato?
Well, I think consistency is key. And
What do you mean
not
by that?
well, sometimes it can get a little too pulsy and sometimes it can get too fast and
Right.
it that way it becomes inconsistent. Like I know for me, my personal struggle is it can sound too pulsy because my breath may be too slow or it's a little too fast and inconsistent.
Okay,
So
great. I mean, not great that you have that challenge. We all
uh,
have that challenge, but great answer. Thank you. I actually would summarize it slightly differently. I would take everything that Tulip said, and this is how I explain what a good vibrato is. One that you don't notice, essentially. If you are sitting and you're hearing the vibrato without directly trying to listen to it, is usually not a good vibrato, in my opinion. A vibrato has to fit within the sound rather than on top of it. I like to think of it like a cake. I hear this idea a lot about vibrato. People say it's like the icing on top of the cake. I do not agree with that. I don't think the vibrato is the icing on top of the cake. I think it's the filling within the cake that you don't necessarily see. A beautiful sound has it there, but you don't go, oh my gosh, I hear it. It's just part of the beautiful sound. Of course, there are some moments where you do hear it because we need to do it for an effect. Or sometimes as a flute player, we're listening to another flute player, we're going, wow, they have a really beautiful sound. What is it that makes it beautiful? And then we start to think about the vibrato. But if you're just listening to music in a kind of general way, I don't think the vibrato should stick out. And I think that's something that we've really got to think about in this first note. So if we all just were to play a G, and you can all do this, and just play a long note, we can start it with absolutely no vibrato whatsoever, and then we can let the vibrato come through and build and build and get bigger and bigger and bigger and get to the point where it's so enormous we would never probably play like that, and then we can bring it right back at something like this. So somewhere in there is a suitable vibrato, just somewhere, not the whole thing, but somewhere in there. Rebecca, you're going to say something.
How long were you playing? Because I only heard about half a second's worth of noise.
Oh, do you know why? Because I haven't put my original sound on. Thank you. Here we go. Let me do that again. You think after all these years of COVID and Zoom, I would know how to do this by now. Okay, let's do it again. Thank you for pointing that out. You hear it now? Okay, can everybody try that? Because it's something I want to show you. So start with no vibrato. You can just pop yourself on mute to do it. In fact, I recommend everyone has themselves on mute just so we'll blow up the computer. And then let it start really slow and big and faster and faster and faster and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow. Get to the point where it's really wibbly wobbly, and then start bringing it back again. I'll do it as well, but you don't have to play it in time with me. We'll do it 3 times each, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. And give it a nice taper as well so you can see how the lips are connecting the note. Okay, everyone done it a few times? Now here's what I hear in my own playing and what I suspect everyone's hearing, and it might be not what you're expecting me to say, but when we start to play with no vibrato, it's fine, and then we start to put the vibrato on, and we make this real effort to play with this big vibrato, and it's too ugly and huge, and we get to the end, and then we start to bring it back, and it's somewhere in the middle of bringing it back that we end up with a beautiful sound. Not on the kind of way forward, but on the way back, because at that point, we're relaxing everything. Listen again and see if you can hear what I'm saying. So on the way forward, I don't think there's any moment where it's a useful vibrato for this piece, but on the way back, there's a few moments. That's probably a nice vibrato for this piece. Does that make sense? So that's an interesting little exercise that I sometimes do just to make sure that I'm actually being sensible, because as was it Tulip that said it? I forget, we don't want to hear this kind of lumpy vibrato, and alternatively also don't want to hear, you know, this like, oh, one that makes you feel a bit seasick. So we got to find this vibrato where it sounds very natural and very in the middle, and only once we found that on the first note can we move on. So I feel like you're not noticing it too much, it's just there. The other thing that we have to be very careful about is the connection from one note to the other. Somebody already said it, was it Daisy? I forget who it was. So how do we approach the first couple of measures to make sure we have a legato sound? What's the best way to do that? Can anyone give me some thoughts? Or would we just play and hope for the best? Because a lot of people do, but it's not going to work. Everybody play it with absolutely zero vibrato. Play it with zero vibrato. We're going for the first 2 notes, like first 2 bars, like this. Okay, and now we're going to do it again, and we're going to make it lumpy, so deliberately bad. No vibrato, like this. Sometimes I find if you're trying to check if you're doing something or if you're trying to make something better, to deliberately do it badly just once allows us to hear where we might go wrong. So now we'll go for the first version, we'll go even smoother than the first version we played, and we'll add our vibrato in, making sure that there is none of that lumps, because that is something the panel will be listening for like crazy. And of course that applies into the next bit as well. No. No. Does that make sense? So already within the first 4 measures, we can tell a lot about a player. We can tell what kind of vibrato are they using and have they thought about the sound that they're making. We can tell, is their finger work smooth? Because if their fingers are lumpy and clumpy, the sound won't be lumpy and clumpy, will also be lumpy and clumpy. Is the release of their air smooth? Because if their release of air isn't smooth, we're going to have accents in all the notes. And then the final thing that I hear immediately in the first couple of measures, first 4 measures, is note endings. Yeah, note endings, a big part of this. And when I was practicing it, I had to really spend some time listening to the note endings. There are 2 things about note endings which I think you have to listen to very carefully in this particular study. The first is the taper. Do you know what I mean by the taper? So we don't want this effect. Sorry. Oh, that is the right notes. Yeah, this kind of cut. We have to imagine there's a secret diminuendo in every note. So it's got this nice taper. Now, how do we practice that? Any ideas? Daisy, any ideas how you would practice that? Oh, Rebecca's going to answer. You're saved by someone else. Go on, Rebecca.
Play it different ways and connect it to the next phrase so that you can play it.
Can you demonstrate for us?
Like-
so I know what you mean?
I can try.
Yeah, go on. Ah, I see. So you're starting the diminuendo quite early in the phrase.
Or-
Yeah, that could work. I actually, well, tell me this: which note do we have to work the hardest with our embouchure to get the taper? Which note in that bar?
The D, if you want to get a good diminuendo on it.
Oh, which I'm looking at the second bar. But the 4th bar works just as well. But look at the second bar.
Oh, the E, the last E, if you want to get a good
Yeah.
diminuendo on
The
it.
E flat, the E flat. So we
Yeah,
have
that.
to learn what's going to happen with the lips at that moment, and the lips have to move. You know, I was always taught, I say this all the time when I'm giving master classes, I was always taught when I was much younger by one particular teacher that the embouchure doesn't have to move as much as we think, that there's 4 positions for the embouchure. I disagree with that now so much. The embouchure has to move like crazy on every note. So let's practice the move of the embouchure on the E flat alone. We'll take the E flat, we'll crescendo, and then we'll bring it back, and we'll bring it back to absolutely nothing. So this kind of effect. And we're listening for pitch, not going sharp in the crescendo and not going flat in the diminuendo. So what do the lips have to do? Can anyone explain it? For me, my lips have to come forward. It's like an elephant's trunk. You know, like they become like an elephant's trunk and then they go back. Now, that's the first thing that we get to control the pitch, essentially. Because if we don't bring them forward and we reduce the amount of air going through the flute to get the diminuendo, we get, you know, that phrase. We don't want it. So we have to keep the airstream high, or the speed of the air, should I say, faster, with a small space by bringing them forward. I kind of think of it like a little taper like that's like giving a kiss. It's kind of what the lips have to do. Now, the other thing I absolutely detest when I hear in people's playing, sorry, I'm saying that very forcefully, but it's just one of my pet hates, is when I hear this. You know, like the windy end to the note. Ooh. I think there's a lot of people out there who think you can do it because no one's going to hear it. That's a load of rubbish. People will hear it. People do hear it. And so we have to work much harder to keep the end of the note clean. So rather than getting, we're going to get, how do we do it? Well, we have to be very, very aware of the angle of our airstream. If the airstream raises too high, we get. If the airstream raises too low, we go flat. So there's this point where we have to be very conscious of. Now here's where it gets a little complicated. As the lips are coming forward to reduce the space, to keep the airspeed so we don't go flat, the angle of air will also change. Because as the lips come forward, what happens to the angle of the airstream? Does it go up or down? It goes up. Thank you, Daisy. It goes up. And that's where we end up with this fizzy, airy sound. So we have to bring the lips forward, but continue to blow onto the perfect blowing edge of the flute, this bit here. And that means we feel like we have to change our angle ever so slightly. So I know there's a lot of talk, especially in band classes, about rolling in the flute and rolling out the flute. And also I heard someone recently had this idea of moving the flute at the end of a phrase. This does not work. It might work for like really basic level, but see, when you have to play like as a grown-up, you just can't do that, as you guys know. We have to do it with our lips. So we have to practice bringing the angle of airstream slightly lower at the end, even though the lips are forward. And then you get no air and completely clean. Does that make sense? This is not an easy thing to do. It's a very, very difficult thing to do in the flute and falls under the idea of flexibility that we're talking about. So you can practice this, of course, on loads of things. You could take a scale, for example, let's take an F major scale, and we're just going to practice it on every note. And then even up the octave. And up the octave again. But what we don't want is so as the lips come forward, the air goes down. Lips come forward, air goes down. And it is small adjustments, but it's very, very important adjustments. And that appears constantly through this study. For me, that is one of the hardest things and the most important things that I have to practice. So if we're looking at the music, we're going to take, let me get my little pencil, where is it? There it is. Here we're going to do huge movements, not huge movements, but we're going to be very conscious of that. Again, here we're going to do it. Here we're going to do it. All these note endings. Here we're going to do it, and of course we've got to do it in a kind of micro detail within the phrase. If I come down a bit, oh, I need to press that button to get rid of it. Here's a huge one. All of these note endings, we've got to really be careful that they're in tune, that there's a beautiful diminuendo taper on them, even when the diminuendo is not marked. And for me, what's very important is that it's clean and it's not fizzy and fluffy and unfocused. Does that make sense? So that's a huge part of this study. The other thing which I think is very important in these note endings is color. What do I mean by color? Anyone not heard this expression before, or anyone heard this expression before that can explain it to me? Rebecca, go on.
I think this is supposed to be a very purple piece and like a very dark, deep, rich piece, like
Fine, possibly. I don't disagree with you.
flavorful.
Yeah, I think what you mean is maybe expressive and colorful. And for me, the most important word is colorful, because the color has to change. I'm not the kind of player who thinks I'm going to make this bit dark and this bit light and this. Sometimes I am, but often I just try and play a little from my heart and choose what's expressive. I don't think we as musicians talk enough about that. Certainly my students here, we talk about this a lot. We have a whole class dedicated to it once a month, which is just a discussion class where we talk about how do we feel in music and how do we make it expressive. It's just the flute players, because it really elevates people's playing. But I like the idea that you're saying, you know, a slightly purple color. The problem with that expression is what someone sees as purple is different to what the other person sees as purple. But for me, I think purple is a slightly darker sound. So I like that. We could certainly take that color at the beginning, for example, and we could be a little darker. As opposed to. So it's got a bit more body. But here's where I think we have to be careful. If we look at this passage here, oh, where did I get my pencil? There. Ooh. There. If we take, oh, I just put this box and I have no idea how to get rid of it, sorry. Oh, I'm making such a mess. Let me get rid of this. Oh my God, Stephen, you know how to do this. There we go. Okay, if we take this bar here, and also this bar here, I do not think they sound beautiful if we play them too dark. It's just my opinion, but if we keep the dark, for example, through these first two bars, that doesn't feel as natural as starting dark and ending a bit paler. As opposed to. Do you hear the difference? I don't know how much you can hear across Zoom. This is also, this is not supposed to be all about my hates in flute playing, but this way of playing is also one of my pet hates in flute playing, where people, I would say, force the low notes, push the lower notes as if they want to sound like a trumpet. For me, it makes no musical sense whatsoever. And also, as a professional, when I was in my orchestra position, I would never have been allowed to play like that in the orchestra constantly. The conductor would have fired me on the spot. It's not an employable flute sound, because the job of the flute in that situation is most of the time to sound like a flute. So I think to keep in mind that we are just a flute, we're not a trumpet, and to try and play like a flute in these studies is very important. I'm not saying there are not moments where you can apply that color to these low notes. There absolutely are. Off the top of my head, things like the Prokofiev Sonata, Prokofiev, as you guys all say, you know, the final movement, things like that work beautifully with that. But this is Adagio con espressione. Is it really the moment to hammer that, you know, aggressive? I don't think so. And I think the reason a lot of people do it is because it makes it a little easier. They don't have to worry too much about the note endings in the taper if they do that. But what is so much more impressive to the listener, and especially to a panel of flute players who know what they're talking about, is that you might start a little darker on this dolce G, dolce meaning sweet, of course, and maybe more singing is the better word, but lightening off at the end of the phrases. So things like controlling the note ending. And we could actually sing it in a vowel. What would you say would be the vowel sound to be a darker color? What would it be? What do you think, Rebecca?
Oh.
I actually think O is about the palest. I mean, it really depends on how you play the flute. There is no right or wrong answer to this. But for me, if I play with an ooey sound, like oo, it gets me a paler color. If I go ah and kind of think of the sound more in the back of the mouth, it's darker. Do you hear the difference? So I would maybe think of this phrase something like so the the vowel is moving constantly. I'm never going ah, but ah, you, ah, ooh, ah, ooh. So the most ooey bit is at the end, and it's constantly shaping, and that's how I get all these colors when I play, and it's something I practice quite a lot. I might even just take one note and kind of change it. And just experiment with what happens when I'm changing the cavity shape within my mouth. Good. Okay, so that's a little bit about tone, vibrato. I'm appreciating we're going to move on. The other thing that we have to be very, very careful of in this opening is these little notes, the 30-second notes. They are not grace notes. Yeah, we got to count them out and position them and place them very carefully, very perfectly and carefully, because that is stylistic of the time. Remember when I said Furstenau was all about style and all about interpretation, and this would have been a very, very important thing of the time, would be to make sure that these are accurate, as opposed to these notes, where they are grace notes. So they can be a little quicker and a little more included within the beat rather than being separate. And that actually is a very important thing about the study as a whole. If I minimize the size of it a little bit. Oh, what's going on? There we go. All of these sections, we have to make sure we are counting them and calculating out the rhythm. So even here, I had a quick listen online to hear people playing it on YouTube. Some people do not show the sixes as opposed to the 30 seconds. Some people just play this as if it's a big run. It is not. That is not how Furstenau wrote that. It's a group of four, a group of four, a group of six, and a group of six. If he wanted to write it as just a big virtuosic run, he would have done that. He could have found 3 or 4 ways to do that, but he chose not to. He chose to be very, very careful that we go Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, strawberry, 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 boom. Okay, that's how I count my 4s, by the way, Coca-Cola. And then my 3s are strawberry, and because there's 2 3s and a 6, you get strawberry, strawberry. So you go Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, strawberry, 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 bang. Okay, so be very, very careful about the counting of these things. And the same with these little bits here. Again, these are not grace notes. Bum, da, 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 dum. He has been very, very specific, and we have to, as players, be very, very careful about that. Okay, makes sense? What is next on my list? Oh, the other thing, by the way, is... Oh, someone's in the waiting room. Let me let them in. You do not have to play the whole study. You know you've just got to play it to... Where is it? Here, which is a weird moment. Let me clear all this rubbish off my screen. Is there no way for me to do this without doing this? There we go. So be very careful about where you actually have to play. When I recorded the thing, I just recorded the whole thing. So, does anyone want to demonstrate a few moments for us, and then we can have a think about it? You don't have to, just a thought. Daisy or Rebecca or Kathleen? Hello, Kathleen, how are you? In San Francisco, I see. I'm joking. Do either of you guys, Rebecca or Daisy, want to demonstrate a little bit?
I can. If
Yeah, go on.
some
Be brave.
places.
Where do you want to go? You show us which bit you want to do.
Maybe the 9 to 12 area.
Yeah, sounds good to me. First of all, before we do 9, play me the very first bar and then stop.
The very first bar?
Yeah. Oh, Rebecca, just check your original sound. We all make the same mistake, don't we? Every time.
I'm not sure how. I will take a minute to go work on that if you can get someone else to play.
Okay, Daisy, you want to play a bit? You don't have to.
I will. I need to warm up just a smidge.
You need to warm up.
Just a smidge.
Play me the first bar, that's your warm up. And then we'll be done. By the way, I should say, this is not about perfection. This is just about us all learning together, so don't worry. If you play it perfectly, I'm going to have nothing to say and then we don't learn. So don't worry at all.
Is it good?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay.
Firstly, Daisy, your note endings and your tapers are beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Here's something though. Play me just the first note and hold it.
With vibrato or?
Up to you.
Okay.
Okay, now play me the first note of the second bar and hold it. Okay, is the embouchure in the same place for both those notes, or does it have to move?
It should move, but right now it's kind of in the same place.
Yeah, it's got to move. So that's something we've got to find now. When you played the E flat, I felt like the first few seconds of it weren't as great as the last few seconds of it. So the embouchure obviously was adjusting to get to where it needed to be, but that adjustment needs to be quicker. And that's something I would say is like a little general rule that I noticed through the first couple of lines that we did. Musically beautiful, phrasing lovely, but sometimes I just felt like the embouchure wasn't quite where it needed to be. You were very close, but not quite. We have to be so specific. And actually, in general, I felt like you were maybe, and I know this is going to sound a bit contradictory, maybe working a bit too much for the low notes. We can be quite relaxed in the low notes and blow a little more into the flute for the low notes. So again, play me that E flat and just find the exact position it needs to be. Beautiful, beautiful. That's it. You got it. So now we're going to play a G and an E flat, nothing else, and we're going to find out the movement. We know where the G has to be, we know where the E flat has to be, so let's put it together like this. No. Do that for me, G and E flat. Beautiful. Okay, so now the embouchure is definitely moving to the right place, but the join between them wasn't very smooth. Can it be a smoother, more legato join from the G to the E flat? No lumps and bumps. Yes, very good. Now, what I also hear is, I'm being very picky, but I'm hoping by telling you this I can help you. I hear that you stop blowing the same amount of air when you move. You go like, ah, oh, but we want G flat. It should sound, although we have to work like crazy, it should sound so easy to the listener. Do it one more time. Oh, we've got two Rebeccas now from two angles. Yeah, that was so much better. It's hard work, right? It's really difficult. Do it again, do it again. That was so much better. No, that wasn't as good as the time before. It wasn't as, it was too high with the embouchure, just a little lower. Yes. Okay, now give us the first two bars. Ya-dee-da-dee-da. There's the position. No lumps, no bumps, no accents, but that's the position for the E flat. Yeah, do it one more time. Do it one more time. I felt like we lost our legato completely. Yes, yes. I would say that's already 50% better. Can you be just a little more relaxed with the embouchure? Although you're controlling the air stream like crazy and the angle of the air, the embouchure itself can be a little more relaxed. Go on, just try one more time. It sounds so good. Play me a great F. Sorry, one octave lower. One octave lower. Sorry, I just want to try something to see if I can figure out what you're doing. Okay, so here's what has to happen. The G is in the right place. The A flat, you do not need to move a single thing for it. It will come out the same place. The F has to be a little lower than the G, and then the E flat a little lower than the F. So let's play a little step exercise where we're going to go. Three blind mice, but we don't want really legato on each note. Those three notes. Good, and you're too much lump and bump on the F and the E flat. Really smooth. Beautiful. Now do that in context of the thing. Exactly that position for those notes. No. Both the F and the E flat were too high in embouchure. It's too tight. Just relax a little bit, Daisy. Relax. Think of having like an orange stuck in your mouth. Oh. Yes. That's better. So I know you're thinking, oh my gosh, Stephen's being so annoying. He's really going into this micro detail. The reason I do it though is because if I was on the audition panel for this, having just heard you play study number 1 and about to hear you play study number 3, that is exactly what I'd be listening for study number 2. So beautiful sound, but incredibly legato and incredibly without any accents that are not written in. I don't think there's a single accent written in the entire study. So there should be no notes that are bumped. Everything should be placed very gently, but with incredible precision and focus. That's the point I'm trying to make. Does that make sense, Daisy? Good. Great. Thank you for playing for us. Rebecca, who's now Lizzie, play for us. Now, we're going to jump to measure 9. So, what's interesting about measure 9, Rebecca?
Well, it's an octave higher.
Yes, and that is very interesting because is it the same position for an octave higher? No, the position changes. Everything changes. The way we treat the air changes. But the listener must not know that. It should sound the same color, the same dynamic, the same everything as the opening. We are now flexing our flute playing muscles to the listener, the panel especially, because they know how hard that is. But we are able to play the middle and higher octave exactly as easily as the initial note. Okay. So play the first bar for me, and then have a little break, and then jump to measure 9. Now measure 9. Okay, good. Very good. There was one big thing I heard different between the two, and it's a very specific thing. What was it?
The start of the first note.
Yeah, you got it. What about it?
The second one wasn't very clear.
It was not clear. How can we practice making it clear? I have a good exercise for this actually, which I'll show you, but you tell me how you practice.
Starting it lots and lots of times.
Yeah, that's actually a very sensible answer. Just going over and over. But often I take the tongue away entirely. Because if I can do it without the tongue, I can control exactly where the air has to be. Now, some people might practice this and just kind of, they call it like huffing or something like that, where they go. I don't think that's a terrible thing to practice, but I don't find it as helpful as doing something else because it's not really a very similar embouchure to when the tongue is in action. So I use a very French articulation sometimes, which I call p. It's like saying the word pe. If everybody just says p p p p p p p p p p p p, and think what the lips are doing. The lips are kind of together and then they separate, or like poo kind of thing. And that's the action. So without saying it, that's the action I practice the G. Because if you don't have the air hitting the exact sweet spot like you didn't, we'll end up with or and this takes a little bit of practice to get it, but see once you've got it, it's that you can control the laser beam of air so carefully ever from that point onwards, should I say. And I actually take this articulation and I will practice specific things with it. For example, I don't know if some of you guys know the Boehm caprices. Do you know the Boehm studies? You could take anything. You could take a scale, for example, and do the whole scale with p. So I'll do 4 p's per note, for example. So there's no tongue. I'm not tongued a single note, but it still sounds almost like I'm tonguing. It still sounds that clean. And of course, it's hard not to split a note, and it's hard to have it as equal and even in the top as the bottom. So let's try it. Everyone that's got a flute, in fact, Lizzie, just try it. Play me a very slow F major scale. You can just do 1 per note for now. And start in the lower F and work out, but every note must be clean. And if you hear a note that you don't think is clean, I want you to stop and fix it. No tongue, just p. Do that one again. There we go. Yes, fantastic. Very good. Wow. There was a few in there that you fixed and you heard them straight away. So now that your ear's on it, that's amazing. Okay, so play me the G, the one that's written in measure 9, and just play me 4 very gentle, slow p's on the G. Okay, so 1 was good, 2 you kind of overshot a little bit, 3 was good, and then 4 you undershot a little bit. Do it one more time. Yes, beautiful. Keep that position. Don't change a single thing. You can add the tongue in very gently and now play that whole bar for me.
Oh, wait.
Good. So the start of the note was now clean and perfect. And it sounds like a lot of work to make just one note clean, but that is the amount of detail and work that we as flute players have to put in to achieve that. And if you don't do it, we hear it a mile off, especially in this situation of an addition. So the G, the lower the octave, is kind of easier to get out. So really keep it nice and clean. And if there's ever a note you're playing and you're like, that's not clean, go to this exercise. It solves everything. I actually wrote a whole book called The Flute Gym, and there's a whole chapter in it about this exercise. I love it. Absolutely love it. It comes from a flute player called Philippe Bernold, who's a very famous French flute player, amazing guy. So I recommend everyone practices it. Okay, we got like 4 minutes left. Do you guys have any questions about specific moments in the piece? I know we've got a whole other session together next month on study number 3, but is there anything in this piece that I can help you with or you want to know? I know we've spoken about vibrato, color, note endings, evenness of sound, start of notes. We've spoken about so much actually, so much to think about. But what specifically can I help you with, or have I answered everything? Or maybe you have no questions. No? Don't worry if you don't. Go on, Rebecca. What's your question?
Yes. How do you interpret the grace notes in 24?
Good question. Also, I've got a great question from, is it Khan? I'm not quite sure how you say your name, about the high notes. We'll come to that as well. 24. So, the first thing to do with this is to practice it with no grace notes. Ya da 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 dum. So I'll do that a few times. Let's just take the first 4 notes for now. 5 notes, excuse me. Now these grace notes cannot interrupt that. They have to just fit in. So now the risk, of course, is that we don't hear the first grace note. So we get, so we've got to be very careful with the trill key. Which opens up a whole other problem. I'm glad you asked about this actually. Because if we play a D with the trill key, it sounds ugly. It's not a good sound. So we have to practice that note isolated on its own with the trill key, trying to make it match the real fingering. So I'd go, you see, we're trying to match them as close together, and then does that make sense? What I don't want to hear is that the rhythm of the 4 main notes are disturbed by the grace notes. So as long as you can constantly compare back to it, I think you'll be just fine. Does that answer the question? And of course, there's plenty of ways to play grace notes in terms of fingering. Sometimes we use trill keys, sometimes we don't. Even in that one, you don't necessarily have to use the trill keys. Works just as well as, fingering it out for real works just as well as using the grace note. I will select, especially on a D, you've got to be very careful. So I will select carefully what is possible and what sounds better. It applies to the shamanad. Everybody on that fast movement of the shamanad that I have heard play it in masterclasses and things recently plays it with the trill key. I don't like it. I personally prefer to finger it out. I think it sounds better. I'm not against people doing it with the trill key as long as they spend the time to get the quality of sound on the fake D. So I would say the same applies here. Okay, how do we get the high notes effortless? Good question. One of the exercises I use is what I call ghost harmonics. I don't know if I've made that expression up or if somebody told it to me over the years, but it's basically like a reverse harmonic. So you finger the high note, but you deliberately miss it. So let me find a high note. Let's take the E flat, for example. Not that high, but it'll work for us to practice with. So we're going to miss it. We're going to finger it as a real note, but we're going to miss it. And then what we're going to do is play that missed ghost harmonic, as I call it, because it sounds like a kind of ghost or a shadow of the real note. And we're then going to bring the lips forward to create a slightly smaller space. There'll be no squeezing, but we bring them forward to create a smaller space. And we also increase the support from our tummy just a fraction. And we should hear it pop up. There's the next harmonic. And then we keep going. And we can get that note to speak effortlessly, very quietly, because I'm doing it all with the support, but mostly with the lips. And it means when we put it in practice, rather than these beautiful tapers. We can do this to every high note. Here's A, finger the top A, and so on. So I think the idea of ghost harmonics is an amazing thing because it teaches you exactly where the lips have to be, exactly what support has to be, and most importantly, you don't have to squeeze to get them out. I hope that answers your question, Kat. We're kind of running out of time. Flute World just gave me an hour to do these classes. So good luck with this study. In a way, I think this is the hardest of all three because it exposes the most problems in our playing for everybody, including me. So really, really be careful. Don't neglect this one. Don't use it as a warm-up exercise. Use it, practice it once you're already fully warmed up because then you'll be able to make the best sound. Record yourself as well because you will notice the accents and the lumps and bumps that you don't even know you're doing by recording yourself. And then you can mark it in your part and you'll be aware of it forever and you'll never do it again. So, excellent. We better stop. Nice to see you guys. We will do study number 3 next month. If you have any questions about this one or number 1, the number 1 video is online somewhere. You can still watch it. But if you have any questions about this one, drop me a message, and I'll happily do my best to answer. You're welcome, Anthony, and you're welcome, Kat. Join up for the 3rd one. I think it's the same link. I don't know if you have to register or not. Again, you'll need to read the Flute World stuff. But thank you to Flute World for sponsoring these classes. I'm very grateful to them. I work a lot with Flute World, and I love working with them. And good luck to you guys with the Texas All-State Studies. I'll see you next month. Happy practicing. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thanks, guys. And thank you, Rebecca and Daisy, for demonstrating. See you all later.